So we've looked at the multiplication division rule using significant figures to determine what we round our final answer to. And then we looked at the addition subtraction rule in which we use decimal places to determine the rounding to our final answer. But what if you had both multiplication, division, and addition subtraction in a given operation? What do? Well, we follow the order of "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally," which is our order of operations that we've learned in mathematics, and then we apply each rule given each step. Let's do the following to understand what I'm saying. So, in this example, of course, we're going to do what's in the parentheses first. The order of operation in the parentheses is subtraction, so that tells us to use the addition subtraction rule looking at decimal places. So here we have 3 decimal places, and here we have 2 decimal places. So we go ahead and we subtract this, and we end up with 0.479. But we're limited by 2 decimal places. We don't want to round off just yet to avoid round-off error for our final answer, since we still have some numbers left in our operation. But to remind ourselves where we need to stop in the parentheses, in the operation that we did in the parentheses, we underline at 2 decimal places. Now we're ready to carry on the rest of our operation. But notice that we went from addition subtraction rule to multiplication, and that means we have to switch modes and go to the addition or multiplication division rule, which says we look at significant figures. Here we have 3 significant figures, here we have 4 significant figures, and here we have 2 significant figures, because remember we put that line here to remind us that we need to stop at 2 significant figures. So we go ahead and we carry out the operation, and we end up with 19.170. But we need to stop at 2 significant figures, right? So that would put us here. We look exactly to the right of that, and 1 is less than 4, so we round our answer, or we keep it the same. So our final answer becomes 19. Okay? Now let us do the next problem. And again, we start out with the parentheses, but notice that in the parentheses we have the multiplication. So first we have to use the multiplication division rule, which means looking at significant figures. So this number has 2 sig figs, this has 3 sig figs, and when we go ahead and we multiply this out, we end up with 4.9464. And of course we want to underline to 2 significant figures, so that will put us here. And we don't want to round off just yet because we're not quite done with the operation. So let's go ahead and bring down the rest of the operation. And now notice we've switched modes. We are working with subtraction, so we're going to use the addition subtraction rules, which says to look at decimal places. So here we know there's 3 decimal places. Here we have 1 decimal place. Okay? Because remember we put this line to indicate based on our operation in the parentheses. So now when we go ahead and we plug this in, we end up with 14.7206, but we know we're limited to 1 decimal place, which puts us here in the operation. We look directly to the right. It's in numbers 2, it's less than 4, so we keep our answer the same. And we report our final answer as 14.7. Okay, now I want you to go ahead and try it, and Go ahead and replay this video when you're done to see if we both end up getting the correct answer. So, in the first example, we'll always start out with the parentheses. So notice that it is, in the parentheses is the subtraction. So we're going to use the addition subtraction rule, which says look at decimal places. Here we have 1 decimal place, and here we have 2 decimal places. So we go ahead and we carry the operation inside the parentheses, and we end up with 330.42. We don't want to round just yet, but we put a line under 1 decimal place to remind ourselves that is our limiting factor. Then we go ahead and we bring down the rest of our operation. And notice that we're using now we are switching modes and using the multiplication division rule, which says look at significant figures. So now we have 4 sig figs here, and we have 4 sig figs here, right? Because we're limited by the underlined number. So we plug this in, and we end up with 1,287.64. But we need 4 significant figures, which would put us here. We look to the number directly to the right of that. It's over 4. So we go ahead and we round this number up, and we report our answer as 1288. As for the next one, let's look at parentheses again first. We always look at parentheses, and we notice that in our parentheses we're going to use the multiplication division rule, and so we're going to look at significant figures. This has 3 sig figs, and this has 4 sig figs. Okay? And then when we go ahead and we carry out the operation in the parentheses, we get 3.6965. But we're limited by 3 significant figures, so we must stop here. The only thing is that we don't round again till the end. So we bring down the rest of our operation. And now notice we've switched to subtraction, so we're going to switch modes and use the addition subtraction rule, which says we use decimal places. So here we have 2 decimal places. Here we have 3 decimal places. And so when we get our final answer, we must round to 2 decimal places, which would put us here. We look to the right of that number, and it's greater than 4, so we round this number up, and we end up with 3.12 as our final answer. If you got the same answers that I did, great. If you don't, go ahead and do the assigned example problems in our slides from your book so you can get some extra practice.